Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with his own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. So here, all of a sudden, immediately after being released, 3 days after this dream, this guy forgot about Joseph. Now 2 years later, all of a sudden he remembers. So I think that again as well proves my theory correct, that he did not forget, but he put it in the back of his mind because he did not want to remember. But now in this case, now Pharaoh is at this dream, right? And no one else can explain to them. All these guys came, right? They're not in a prison, they're out in the open. They could get all the best guys to come and explain, and no one could explain. Remember, there they were in the prison. Where will you find someone to explain? There was someone to explain, because God was there. Yeah, they're out in the open where they have all the best people in the country gathered, and no one can explain. So you see as well that kind of the contradiction between there in prison where we expect no one, there's the one. Here out in the open where you have everyone, there's no one. Okay? So that again clearly shows, and what Moses is showing to us, and the Bible is teaching us, that it does not depend on where you are, it depends on God. Right? If you're in a prison, God can give you answer there. You can be out living in a 5-star hotel with all the theologians and scientists around you and still know nothing, right? Like so many of them. Okay, you can go to church your whole life and still end up knowing absolutely nothing of God. So this guy tells in the story of how they were put in prison. No, they were just in custody, not in prison, in custody, making a little bit less. And it tells about the dream they had the same night, different ending, right? And then he says in verse 12 that there was this Hebrew, but he calls him a servant of the captain of the guard. He doesn't call him a Hebrew prisoner, a slave that was imprisoned. He is just now a servant of the captain of the guard. So immediately kind of upgrade Joseph now here. Not a slave, a Hebrew slave that's been put there unlawfully in prison, but the prisoner, a servant of the captain of the guard. So as well in the same way then, he's not only uplifting, but he's as well downplaying his own sin. Because if he's saying, you know, I knew there was a slave there who did all of this for us, and he asked me to tell you about this, and I made the choice to forget about it and not mention any of this, and then he was still languishing for 2 years there in prison, that would make him look very bad. Okay, and Pharaoh could have turned around and just sort of kick him back into prison for doing something like that to Joseph. Okay, Joseph could have done that later on when he was set free, but lo and behold, so it's not going to happen. And this guy, for this reason, for his own, the sake of his own skin kind of, he is therefore telling the story in such a way. Okay, so he doesn't want to, he wants to make mention of Joseph and kind of now, but he can't tell the full truth because that would be detrimental to him. And at the same time, I mean, Joseph being a slave, but I don't think it's, at this stage, the Pharaoh wouldn't care a slave or not a slave. Slaves did lots of things through the years. Peter the Great had a slave, was later on the father or grandfather of Pushkin, a very famous Russian poet, the most famous Russian poet. And so, you know, from slaves, people, it's not the end of the world kind of idea, right? So if he needed an answer and the slave could give it, I don't think Pharaoh himself would have minded about, you know, this is just a slave kind of idea. But sure, for the cupbearer, that would have looked very bad. And so he was not going to, he called him a servant of the captain of the guard. And yes, he interpreted, and as he gave interpretation, it happened. The baker was then killed and he was restored. So the cupbearer restored his office and the baker was hanged. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Okay, so Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. Where did they find him? In the prison. Why? They call it again a pit. Remember, Joseph called it a pit. Here they call it a pit. Why are they calling it a pit? It was not a pit, right? Joseph was not like that, not deep down like that. He was kind of, I mean, say he was having a good life in prison. He was still in prison, right? But he was sure not in a pit in that sense. But like I mentioned before, this is to remind us of what his brothers did to him. He was in a pit, right? Like his brothers. His brothers put him in a pit. So because Potiphar, they're now in prison. Potiphar's wife is in prison. So he calls it a pit to show back to that. So Moses, through all of this, through all Joseph's words and the words here, he's drawing the line back to the brothers. Right? So he's telling the 12 tribes here, that's all descendants of the brothers. See, it all goes back to them, there. The pit, the pit, the pit. Okay, so he was shaved, got rid of all the hair, I guess, you know, the beard and all the other kinds of hair. Change of clothes, because, you know, you come in front of the king, you need to be dressed well. I mean, you're not going to walk like I am now in front of the king. Because it's weird when we go to church, we are fine with dressed up like that, going in front of God like this. But when we go to visit somebody important, right, we make sure we dress up correctly, okay? So who's kind of important? Who's more important, God or this human being you're going to visit? But anyhow, again, that's not the point here. This is normal, right? This is ethics. This is the way things are done. He's going to come to Pharaoh, so it's done in this way: shaved, bathed, cleaned up, no new clothes, and now Joseph is going to appear before Pharaoh.